Amen. Sister Juliana, could you share with us William Miller's rules, number 1 and 5? Tell us what they say. Rule 1 and Rule 5.
Number 1 says that each word is important. And number 5, the Bible is that's what it says. The Bible explains itself. It's what it is.
So the Bible explains itself, number 5. And number 1, each word has its importance. And how did I change rule number 1? I changed it slightly.
Because we actually for a keyword that might be that might have no purpose. There might be no purpose.
Can everybody hear? Can you hear? Can you speak a little bit louder?
So you have to choose a keyword that should guide your study. It might be more important than the other.
Brother Douglas, what else about rule number 1? Every word has its importance, but when we're doing something, one word might be particularly important. We had one small extra piece.
What?
We had an extra piece of detail,
Yeah.
which is,
I'm talking about everyone must have its proper bearing. Everyone is important.
she's done that.
Yeah. So the extra piece was that in that passage there's a word which can be more important.
She's done that.
So what you're asking is
There's one more piece. Can't remember. Sister Denise? Sister Daniela?
I think it depends on the importance. The one word that could be more important than the others depends on the kind of study you're doing.
So it depends upon the study you're doing
Yeah, like
and
context.
Sister Ruth?
The study you're doing will lead you to a keyword in the Bible.
So that's what she said, and there's another nuance about that. Yesterday, we're in a group, we're all doing the same study. Brother Douglas?
so what you say, the keyword can lead you to
No, she says when you're doing a study,
yeah.
depending what the study is, will depend upon what the key word is.
So now you can switch around.
Yeah,
The keyword will depend on what the study is.
yes. And the last point was, it depends upon the person. Now, what you think is important might not be what I think is important, even in the same study. So rule number 1 is a lot more flexible, which makes it more problematic. It's not as rigid as we might think. I'm sure you've read the rule, you've heard it, you've heard people claim, I say that carefully, I don't mean it in a judgmental way, but they claim to use the rule, but if they're not willing to admit that they're picking and choosing what the words are and their importance, I think they're being disingenuous. So it's not as existential. It's not sort of just a truth that is there, that this would be, you know, the importance of each of those words. It depends upon the person's perspective, and it depends upon what they're doing. I think you'll find that increasingly as you approach a subject. Rule number one is not that straightforward. It seems really, as I said before, benign, simple. Every word should have its proper bearing upon the subject. But it isn't that straightforward. And what we end up doing to our own hurt is we take that rule and we say that rule means proof texting. So every word has its proper bearing. We take the word Sabbath and run it through various Bible verses, and we think we're using that rule. And I'm not saying that is not an application of the rule, it is, but it's simple. The reality is you need to try to search out the word that's important in the context of what you're doing to help and direct you. And if you don't do that, you'll miss things. If you miss things, you're likely to make mistakes. So the whole objective is to try to use rules to head you in onto the right path so you don't wander off the path inadvertently. Without these rules, it's really difficult to have any kind of objectivity.
So if I can say all those 3 points in one sentence, didn't work for me, but just to mention the last 3 points, would it be correct if I said that the key word is determined by 3 things? A, 1, the user; B, the context; and C, the type of studying being done?
Yes.
Would it be correct to say it that way?
And I want to remind us, and I think it's fair to do that. I'm sure people will either watch this video or you might think, you can't just play around with those rules. That's what I could get accused of, because the rule says every word. And I'm saying, of course every word has its importance, but some are more important than others. And our task is to find the ones that are more important than others. Some people use the word noise. It's a kind of a word that's been coined now. We all know what it means. It's extraneous information. It's there. And I want us to be careful, because when we say noise, it could be noise in this study, but it may not necessarily be noise in another study. So Bible study is not only a science, it is an art. If it was just a science, we wouldn't need the Holy Spirit, really. We could just do it with, you know, human ingenuity and wisdom, and the clever people would come up with all the answers. But it is an art, and when I say art, it's not just something that the Holy Spirit will give you information. Perhaps art is not even the right way of expressing that. But some people have a flair for it, and other people really struggle. But each of us can draw, however bad or however good we are. Some of us are competent artists and some of us are not very good, but all of us can draw. So when we talk about an art form, everyone can practice this. Some people will just be better than others. I don't think we should concern ourselves about that. And everybody should know themselves and be comfortable with who and what they are. Any questions on the rules? Okay, I'm not saying these rules trump all the other ones, but these 2 rules are the ones that come up over and over again, from my perspective. You'll see rule number 5, when Rachel read it, I cut her off and she didn't read the second part of the rule. I don't know if you remember that. The second part of the rule, let's read the second part of the rule, if you don't mind. The reason why I mention that is if you've read the rules before, it's pretty much a repeat in a condensed version of rule number 14, if you're familiar with the rules. A 5.
Scripture must be its own expositor, since it is a rule of itself. If I depend on a teacher to expound it to me, and he should guess at its meaning, or desire to have it so on account of his sectarian creed, or to be thought wise, then his guessing, desire, creed, or wisdom is my rule, not the Bible.
So that second part, which we didn't read, which isn't, it's just basically don't follow human beings. It's dangerous to do that. is essentially rule number 14, the last rule. If you begin just the 14th rule.
The most important rule of all
Is to have faith.
that we should have faith.
So it begins with faith, and then it moves on to basically don't be a bigot. He uses the word bigot in the context, don't copy people. Don't take their studies and just parrot them without understanding what you're doing. And then when someone attacks you, challenges you, you say, I'm not even going to listen to what you say, I don't care because I just follow my leader or this person. He says we should not be doing that. If someone asks you a question and they show you that you're wrong, we should be willing to change. It's human nature that we're very unwilling to do that. Rule number 5 and 14, the second part, I think are very similar. If Rule 14 is quite long, so I don't want to read it, but if you should all have access to that, and if you've got it in your Bibles, these bookmarks are relatively easily available. So that's why I like Rule 1 and 5. When Ellen White comments on the rules, if anybody can find the quote where she does that, she lists rules 1 to 5, and she says these are examples of that. I'm inclined to think it's not, she didn't just stop at 5 for any reason, like she was tired of copying them out. I think she wants to make a point to us, even if it's a subtle point, that rules 1 to 5 are the ones that are particularly important compared to the other ones. Some of them are subtly repetitive. 5b, 14b, they're subtly repetitive. And in my own thinking, as she uses rule 1 and 5, I've thought of the first and the last. They're the ones that are important, they're the ones that guide you. They have similar characteristics about them, 1 and 5. So that's why I focused on them. It's not to say that the other ones are unimportant. Any questions on those rules? Anything to add? Any thoughts? Did anybody find a reference? Save me looking. Okay, we'll move on. People are looking, so they'll find it in a moment. So we've done the rules. What else have we looked at? Oh, you found it? Yeah? It lists out the rules. These are examples of rules, yeah? Review and Herald, November?
November 25, 1884.
Did you say paragraph? Did you give a paragraph?
Say again?
Did you give a paragraph? I don't remember.
You want to get the paragraph?
I thought you had, sorry, I don't know.
Oh no, this is copy it down with it and then that's what it says, yeah. But
Okay. 23, sorry. Sister Denise, could you give us the list of 7 Persian kings?
Cyrus, Cambyses, Bosmerdus, Darius, Artaxerxes, Ahasuerus, Ahasuerus.
Okay, so we'll start again. Cyrus,
Cyrus, Cambyses, Bosmerdus, Darius, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, Artaxerxes.
excellent. Everybody got that? Do you know them, Sister Effie? Do you know the 7 kings? Yeah, you can repeat them? Yeah, okay, can you do the 7 Judean kings?
Manasseh, Amon, Josiah, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim,
Can't hear you so well.
Oh, sorry. So
Jehoiakim.
Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, Zedekiah.
Okay, if we can try and remember, it's Jehoiakim,
Kin.
not chin.
Oh, okay.
It's not a big point. Yeah,
Kin.
yeah, because Kim and chin, people say. It's kin and kin. Good. Sister Catherine, we leave the easy one for you. 7 Israelite kings. No? You know some of them, I'm sure. Give us the ones that you know.
Almost did it backwards.
Go ahead, I don't mind. Backwards is good.
Hoshea, Pekah, Biant,
Pekah.
Biant.
I can't hear you so well.
Wrong or?
Okay, so we'll miss that one. Okay, so we'll miss the next 3. And the first one.
First one is Jeroboam 2.
Good. So we've got Jeroboam, Pekahiah, Pekah, and Hoshea. Sister Wendy?
Do you want me to do all of them or
Mhm.
one she's?
Okay, just the ones you missed then.
I know she missed Shalom. That's one I'm saying.
Okay.
And there's one at the end. That's all we can remember.
Okay. Brother Jeffrey?
You don't want me to look at my notes?
No, I prefer not to. This is not an open book test.
I don't remember them off the top of my head.
Okay.
Which one did she miss?
She missed, well, they started giving them randomly. So she got 2 of the missing ones, so there was only 1 left. But I wanted them in order.
I definitely don't know them in order.
Okay, so did you see that? Just give them in random then. They don't even have to be in order.
Jeroboam,
Jeroboam,
Shalom, Pekah, Pekah, something there's like a,
Pekahiah.
yeah.
Good.
That's all I can remember.
Okay. Sister Ruth? No? Sister Daniela? Going to give us all of them?
I may not pronounce these around correctly.
Don't worry about the pronunciation. My pronunciation is not good.
So Jeroboam, Zechariah, Mena.
Uh-huh, that's fine.
Pekahiah, Pekah, and then Hoshea.
Excellent, very good. Did you get that? Sister Catherine? Did you get that? Go ahead.
Jeroboam 2, Zechariah, Shalom, Menahem, Pekahiah, Pekah, Hoshea.
Very good. Was that not good?
No, I said, is that in order? I'm just asking.
Was it in order?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know for sure.
I trust Sister Daniela. They got them. They were both the same, so I'm saying it's. Oh, they were different. Oh, they were different. Well spotted. I wasn't paying attention. Okay, have a quick look then. Let's get it straight.
Zechariah, Shalom, Menahem. Say it how I had it. Speak it. Jeroboam 2, Zechariah, Shalom, Menahem,
Pekah.
Pekah, and Hosea.
Okay, so which ones did you got wrong? Shalom and Menahem?
That's how I said it.
Oh, how you said it? So did you get it wrong?
Yeah, I mixed
Ah.
Menahem and Shalom.
Okay, you flipped them round. So which one's first?
Shalom.
Shalom. So S and then M. Okay, so we're all good? Did you have your hand up, Sister Denise? Did you have your hand up? No? All good? So, we're using the rules, 1 and 5. We come to a verse. What should we look for, Sister Rachel? One thing.
Which words are most important?
We've done that, rule 1 and 5. What else should we be looking for? Or a spirit of prophecy quote, it works either way.
Oh, you should look, try to understand what the verse is saying, and then look at the context.
Okay, so not that bit. It's really difficult to ask the questions without sort of giving the answers. So that's correct, but when you look at a verse, you should be searching for things. So the first thing you're going to do is search for keywords. If you're not sure what a word means, see if you can allow the Bible to define that in some way so that we don't have to do it. Often it's not that easy to do, so you have to go to human strength, aka Strong's Concordance, which is all fine. Something else, one of the first things that we do once we've done all of that we should be looking for.
Notice if there's any repeat and enlarge.
Okay, so always look for patterns. We always want to look for patterns. And another word for pattern is structure. And another word for structure, Brother Douglas, is what?
Another word for structure.
Patterns or structures or... This is not a dictionary definition, these are my thoughts. Everybody sees things slightly differently, but I can only ask you to think the same way I'm thinking, I guess. And then when you go back, you need to unlearn it all. Not light. Brother James.
Models.
We'll go with models. I'll put models here, but no, not models. I don't want to do models. Parables. Because remember, parables are a lot more than just the natural and the spiritual. Yeah? If I said the lions have devoured, okay? We know that's a parable, but it's not this kind of parable. There's no structure to that. It's just a statement of fact. We'd want to see what devour means. We'd want to see what lions are. So that's a classic parable. Yeah? There was a shepherd, he had 100 sheep, one of them got lost. A classic parable, the natural goes to the spiritual. But parables come in different shapes and sizes. There are other ways to understand parables. They're just different facets of the same thing. So we want to look for pattern structures of parables. And they come under various names. We've spoken about these before. Or you've spoken about them in the class that Elder Tabo did. So we've got the natural and the spiritual. That's one way of seeing parables. I'm not sure if it would be a structure in that sense. What other ways do we understand parables? Anyone?
Known and unknown.
Known and unknown? I think someone said it a little while ago. Sister Rachel? Yeah, I thought you said that. Yeah? Repeat and enlarge. Some of these have overlaps, but I like to use the different phrases because when you have a phrase, it helps you, I think, to locate things.
Can you put tautology on there?
Okay, we can. I'll put tautology. But tautology is the fancy word for repeat and enlarge. Sorry?
Thought it was more like repeat and repeat.
Okay, so I remember when Sister Wendy gave us the definition, you said what?
Saying the same thing two different ways.
Yeah, saying the same thing, and I think she said something like, with different words. So it repeats and enlarges. Because if it was just the same words, it would just say, the prophecy was fulfilled, or fooled, or woe. Compare. We can all finish it. Compare and contrast. A related one, juxtaposition. Did you do juxtapositioning before in class together? Yeah? So juxtapositioning. So these are all forms of parables. And I think for me, if you can remember the terms, when you approach a verse, you'll be able to see the parable, that it is a parable, by saying, oh, this is not the lions have devoured, which is a natural story. This is a compare and contrast. Yeah? Are we okay with that? So, or it could be a juxtaposition. These are, again, very similar, juxtaposition and compare and contrast. So, we'd go to Daniel 11 verse 40. Daniel 11 verse 40 talks about, in a simple way, talks about what, Sister Catherine? Don't need any of the details. What's the thing that would jump out at you? Daniel 11 verse 40. When you read the verse, what do you see? Can't hear?
Pushed at him.
Pushed at him? Who's pushing at whom? King of the North, King of the South. So what's standing out? Because you don't even know what pushed at him really means.
War.
Sorry?
War.
Or, did you say?
War.
War. Okay, war between? Two kings. And what do you know about those kings? North and south. Okay, so Sister Wendy, what's a juxtaposition? When you juxtapose things. We can either do it through example or give a definition.
Find the differences.
Find the differences.
Well, isn't it kind of like compare and contrast?
It is. That's what. So either give like a definition, if that's what you're going to give, or you can give an example. Sister Juliana, we're in Daniel 11 verse 40, and obviously we've spoken about this, juxtapositioning, compare and contrast, so you know that's where I'm headed in this discussion. Where do you see a juxtaposition in that verse? Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of a definition for juxtapositioning. Juxtaposition is placing two elements, or two words, or two concepts, two ideas, side by side. And you let the reader compare them. This act compares and contrasts the two elements, and it can show various things. Irony, humour, or sadness. It's not a biblical rule or method of writing. It works perfectly well in the secular world. Give another definition. If you juxtapose two contrasting objects, images, ideas, or concepts, you place them together or describe them together so that the difference between them is emphasized. The technique is used for dramatic effect. So what's the juxtapositioning in Daniel 11:40? Okay, so it's north and south. We okay with that? So when we approach the verse, that's the first thing that should hit us. That we've got a parable in here, and we've got a north and a south. Now if you've all read the Time of the End magazine, or you've listened to studies for the last 25 years, maybe 28 years, you'll have seen no one ever speaking about it in this context. No one mentioning juxtapositioning, parable, none of that. Everyone knows it's a parable, because we all know that. But what parable is this that we think, for the past 25 years, in the Time of the End magazine, the way we've looked at this verse, out of all of those, what one would you go for when we say it's a parable? Because we know it's a parable. Sister Ruth? I can't hear you so well. Just give me the answer, because I know you're thinking. Just tell me what your answer is.
Known to unknown.
Tell me what that means to you, known to unknown.
So, known is what we are familiar with. We have seen the King of the South all along in Daniel 11. So we have an idea of two kings. And now the unknown part here is that this specific
So is that just natural and spiritual? Yeah? So we've used parables, we've understood it to be a parable, and we've just looked at the natural going to the spiritual. We understand what south naturally is. Brother Larry, what is south naturally? In the context of Daniel 11, or the Bible even really, when it says south.
With the king too?
No, nothing to do with the king. If I said south, south country, south king, south people, what's it talking about?
South America.
South America. So if it was north, if you're going to say South America, you're going to be forced to say what?
North America.
North America. So do you think this fight is about North America and South America fighting?
Probably
but the king of North America is he fighting the king of South America? So it's not about America then. Brother David, South?
In the context of the verse,
Not in the context of the verse, no. Just generally, the symbol of South, the natural.
symbol of south, that's tending downwards.
Downwards, depending which way you're looking.
Exactly, yes.
So it might not be downwards. You can't say downwards.
Sorry, that
That
you
is-
said natural, so I'm thinking that way.
Only if you live in the northern hemisphere. Southward, because it could be anywhere.
Right.
When the Bible talks about south, what's it talking about? Sister Rachel?
I think of Egypt.
Egypt. So the Bible's always 99% of the time talking about Egypt. And the north? Babylon. So you've got Babylon and Egypt. That's going to be your starting point, which is the natural. You know that. And then it moves on to the spiritual. So we've approached Daniel 11 verse 40 from that perspective from the very beginning. The natural and the spiritual. It's a parable. So people seem agitated these days. So I said 30 years. Obviously the book wasn't written in 89, it was written in 96. So I'm just saying 30 years as a generic term. Recently, people are getting agitated because they think we're undoing what we already learnt before. What in fact are we doing, Sister Catherine? Before you answer that question, what did we do from the very beginning? We went to Daniel 11 verse 14, what did we do? Well, I mean, what we did, how do we approach the verse? As a parable. What should we have done? What should we have done, Sister Juliana? How should we have approached the verse? I can't hear, look for? Yes, we did everything correct. No mistake. We look at the verse and we approached it as it was a parable. That's what we did, and we were correct in doing that. So there was nothing wrong. Are we okay with that? So what's changed, Sister Wendy?
Well, we have a lot more information to be able to find more information.
A lot more information on what?
Methodology. Parable.
Okay, so we've got a lot more information on how parables work. They're a lot bigger, they're more complex than we first gave them credence. So it's not just, you can't just rely upon natural and spiritual anymore. You have to add in other ways of understanding and dealing with parables. Are we okay with that? So now when I say, Sister Catherine, you look at the verse and what jumps out at you? North and south jump out at you. Not only because they're used frequently in the Bible, Egypt and Babylon, but they're polar opposites. So as soon as you see them being polar opposites, that has got nothing to do with natural, has it? If I say two things are polar opposites, that's got nothing to do with natural. It's using a totally different concept or idea, which we call what, Sister Effie? Which we call juxtapositioning. But when you start thinking about juxtapositioning, you realize that juxtapositioning has all the characteristics, the dictionary definition characteristics of what, Sister Ruth? Or
We have the
just simply, or what?
juxtaposition.
Juxtapositioning is compare and contrast, it's the same thing. It has all the characteristics of what? Of parables. It's just another way or another form of expressing parables. And it does not have to be natural to it go into the spiritual. It doesn't work that way. And that's what we haven't seen. We haven't seen that parables are more pervasive. They are not just this simple definition, natural to spiritual. Because north and south is not natural to spiritual, is it? It's, however you're going to do it, it's natural to natural or spiritual to spiritual. You're not jumping realms. You're in the same realm. But when you have north and south, now you're into juxtapositioning. And juxtapositioning, it says, placing two elements side by side. So, I'm guessing when you did your studies this week, last week, on parable teaching, you went through some of the definitions. You went through, did you go through the Greek? No? Of how the word parable is. Okay. So the word parable is two words, parabole, and para means what? If you've got your software, have a look. First one. Para. Whatever you want to use. If it's an Android, you won't have eSword on there. It'll be my sword. Are we struggling to do it? Are you struggling, Sister Wendy? What are you doing? Tell me what you're doing.
I was just going to look up para, just Google it.
No, that wouldn't be a way to do it. Let her do it on her phone.
I don't know if it's on my phone.
You don't have a Bible software on your phone?
I do. I just do it.
So you're going to pull up the Bible software, you're going to do a search, and you're going to search the word parable. Or you could go to a Bible verse that you know has the word parable.
It brings up verses.
Okay, you can just click one of them, a New Testament one.
Thayers.
So you're either in KJV, top left hand corner, or KJV Lite, one of the two. If it's KJV, it'll have the Strong's numbering shown there. If it's Lite, it won't. If it has the Strong numbering on it, you just go to the word parable and you click that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it should pop up, and it will say that it's composed of two words. We should be in 3846, I think.
This is 3850.
Sorry? Oh, yeah, sorry. 3850. Then it will say it comes from another word, 3846. If you press 3846, so if you press that, it will say that word is made up of two separate words, which is 3844 and 906. So if you press 3846, Sorry, 3844. That's, what's the word?
Para.
Para. And para means?
From, of, at, by, besides, near.
Are you in Thayers?
Yes.
Okay, if you go to Strong's,
A primary preposition, properly near.
so it means near. Yeah? So para means near. If you back out of all of that, and then go to 906. So if you press 906 in Strong's, so we look at the word ballo or bol. It means to throw. Did everybody follow along with that in their phone or in their computer? Brother David, you did that?
Yeah, I was able to get to 3G3850 and I highlighted.
So you got to 3850.
Yeah, I have my mouse over it. It shows me the 3846 which you mentioned earlier on.
Okay, are you in eSword?
I am in this.
Okay, so if you right click your mouse when it says 3850, let me make sure I'm doing that correct. So you've no, if you go to press 3850, then go into Strong's. It's not working. I just want to get people used to using this software, because if people aren't getting it to work, okay, so you're in 3850.
Yeah.
Your mouse doesn't. This doesn't work. Okay,
No,
that's fine. So if you right-click that, it says look up 3846. So I go to 3846 from 3844 and 906. So 3844 says near, and 906 says to throw. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
So it means to throw near. If we say it's to throw near, I'm saying that concept is the same as this concept, which I'm going to read to you. Placing two elements or two words side by side. So you had two things, and what we're going to do, bring them side by side. That's the same thing as getting something, which is here, getting another object and doing what to it? Throwing it near. So when it says side by side, we've got the word parable, and just this part of it, para, sounds very much like parallel. And the word parallel means what? It means taking two things side by side. There's a mathematical definition of it. It's two lines that never cross. So two parallel lines are like this. You bring them side by side. So the word parable comes or is associated with the word parallel. It's bringing two things next to each other, which is the same definition as juxtapositioning. Bringing two things next to each other in order to compare and contrast them. So juxtapositioning can be the natural and the spiritual, but in its pure literary style, it's never used that way. So, Sister Daniela, can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question, or were you busy doing something? Yeah? Okay, so just summarize the development of Daniel 11 verse 40 in our thinking. What have we said? Just summarize what we've said so far. We went to Daniel 11 verse 40.
Yes.
king of the south and the king of the north.
Tell me what the natural is of that.
The king of the south being Egypt and the king of the north being Babylon.
Okay?
Yes, then, yeah, that's all we've done.
Okay, that's all we've done for 28 years.
Oh, everything else.
In the class, we did a bit more. When I asked Sister Catherine how she would look at the verse, what jumps out at her,
Yeah.
what jumps out?
The king of the north and the
We'll take the word king out.
south and the king and the north.
Okay, so explain that.
I'm sorry.
Explain north and south.
Like defining
It-
north and south.
No, it's just the concept of north and south.
Okay. You compare the two.
Okay, so we've shifted from natural to spiritual,
Right.
and now we've come to compare and contrast or juxtapositioning. It's a totally different concept. So when you start saying north and south, you're no longer saying Egypt and Babylon, literally. You're using a totally different model now, which says if it's north, you must then think the other party would be what? It has to be south. It couldn't be east, because north and east are not juxtaposition or juxtaposed. So we've seen how we've changed our approach to the verse. It doesn't undo what we did in the past. It now adds to it, and that adding has done what? It's created what, Sister Wendy? When you add this extra detail, what does it do for you?
Gives us a better idea of what we're looking at.
It creates new information or new light, information that we weren't aware of before. And you can't be aware of the information because you're limited in your approach to the verse. If you're only going to see it as the natural and the spiritual, you can only go so far. And so when we start saying, we should be looking at this in a different way, it's not instead of, it's in addition to. And people have been confused about this, and it's caused a lot of people a lot of heartache, that they wonder, are we throwing away our past foundation, our past history? What's going on? So I want us to be really clear, because verse 40 is the verse of this movement. It really defines who and what we are. We've done over 5,000 hours of videos just on one verse. It really, everything that this movement is about is all about this one verse, Daniel 11 verse 40. And as I say, we've spent the vast majority of that time, over 90% of the time, just going natural to spiritual. Thousands of hours of material on that. And we've learnt a lot. But now we're saying we are looking at the verse in a different way, with a different perspective. But it's all parable teaching. So I want us to see how all of this is the family of parables. And if that's the case, then you can clearly see that graphically it's clear that our focus was here, the natural and the spiritual, but now our focus is down here. And it's part and parcel of the same study, it's the same methodology, it's nothing new. I'm not even sure if we could call it a refinement, because it's not a refinement of this, is it? It's just a totally different approach. And this is why I think people have been perturbed or disturbed, because some people call it a refinement, and other people will say, this is not a refinement, it's totally new. And I think it is totally new, but it's not totally new to say, therefore that was wrong. It's totally new because juxtapositioning is parable teaching, but it's using a different approach. Sister Denise.
Could you just call it a different witness account? Like the Gospels have different, it's the same thing, but you're looking at it in a different way from a different perspective.
Could it be called a witness account?
I'm not sure the term witness account, but the way you've rounded out what witness account means, yes, you're looking at the same words, but you're looking at them from a different perspective. We're not looking at them from natural to spiritual. We're looking at them as comparing and contrasting two protagonists, two directions of the compass. If you have north, you have to have south. Yep. Any questions?
So north and south will be similar.
They have similar characteristics, but they're obviously opposites as well. So there's similarities and there's differences.
If you say that you can't do natural and spiritual in King North and King South, or we can and we can just use juxtaposition also?
Also, north and south, whatever we learn about that, that's fine. That all holds. North and south means the natural north and the natural south going to lead us to what? The spiritual north and the spiritual south. We're not going to get much more than that. But now if we say, okay, let's put that aside and let's look at juxtapositioning. Juxtapositioning is not going to give this natural and spiritual. It doesn't have the ability to do that in the way we've approached this. You could argue juxtapositioning is natural to spiritual, and it is. You take a sheep and you do what? I have a sheep and I have a person, and what am I going to do? Place them side by side, let the reader or viewer compare them. The act compares and contrasts the two elements. So isn't that juxtapositioning? But this is natural and spiritual. Does that make sense? That's why it's even though I've listed them there, the whole concept is fluid. From if you say it's natural and spiritual, that's juxtapositioning. If you go compare and contrast, you could say that when you compare and contrast, you compare the natural and the spiritual, but you can compare other things. Any questions on that? It really is an important point that we need to get to become familiar and comfortable with. When you compare and contrast things, how you compare and contrast them is vitally important. North and the South are all natural. We want to compare the natural with the spiritual. But we're not doing that today. We're not saying King of the South and the King of the North and it's Babylon or it's God. Natural and spiritual. We're not saying Babylon turns into the United States. We understand that. We've been teaching that for a long time. What we're looking at is north and south, what that can give us, what that can teach us. Right? Okay.
Sorry, I have a question. Now that we know all of these, how do you call them, are sort of modules within parables, or forms of parables, when you are investigating a passage, is there any kind of defined or set rules in which one to start with? And I'm not talking about, finding what the word means and all that stuff, finding out the important words and determining which one is more important based on the use of the context or biblical study being done. I'm talking about, so we've done all that, and now we're into the, I think the fourth point would be, okay, check to see, how it relates to it being a parable. So, do we just say, let's just pick and choose based on what we found what we determined from the first 3 points?
I think each person, there are hard and fast rules, but the approach that we take depends on the person, depends upon the study. I'm not sure if I could give you a didactic list to say this is the way you should approach it every time, all the time, because each of us explain things in a different way, and we think differently. You then have to employ some of Miller's other rules, like when you approach a verse, what should you assume when you ever approach a verse? If you know the rules well enough, and I paraphrase the rules, so maybe you're familiar with them, and my paraphrase throws you off track.
Every word is important.
Not the two that we did, another one. In fact, no. That everything should be understood literally. That everything, just take it at face value. And if it doesn't work, then what? Then you assume that there's something funny going on, that now there's symbology. The lions have devoured Israel. So you take that, assume it's literal. So you go back into history and you say, well, there are a band of lions roaming Palestine, eating people up. Not really. That's not what, it didn't work that way. So then you say, okay, that must be a parable. So as you're into parable territory, then everything that we've discussed. The thing is, nearly 99% of the time it's always a parable. You know, it's very rare that you just get something literal. And if it is literal, you don't often learn that much. Okay, so we've gone through the rules, 1 and 5. We've seen how those work. We've seen how we look at important words. Then we look at patterns in the passage. Patterns or structures or parables. We gave an example, Daniel 11 verse 40. North and south. You trace that through the chapter, you know this is Egypt and Babylon, geographical areas. And you say, well, at the end of the world, are we going to start talking about a fight that's happening in the Middle East somewhere? We don't think so. There's not any evidence that that's going to be the case. So then we say, well, these natural imageries are really that, and we need to understand them in this spiritual context. So someone asked me a question, not here, in a previous place recently. They said, we spoke about Russia being the king of the south. They said, hold on, Russia is not south of Israel. How does that work? So my first response was, sure it's not, but neither is Rome. And why did you not ask me about Rome or America, however you want to understand the King of the North? Why did you not say that's not north of Israel either? Why did you focus upon Russia? So that's the first thing to notice. If you're going to argue about one thing, you have to argue about another thing. If you don't like the south, you're not going to like the north either. And sometimes people aren't aware of their own prejudices, and maybe you're not aware of your own prejudices and your own hang-ups and your own preconceived ideas. And it becomes really difficult to challenge yourself. In my experience, it's a rare person that can do that is disciplined enough to prevent themselves making mistakes. William Miller was pretty good at that. He studied, I'll say completely by himself. I'm not sure. I'm not saying he didn't consult his family or close friends or whatever, and maybe bounce things off them. But he pretty much studied by himself. And if you see how much he got right, you'll see that he has this rare talent, that he's able to be extremely disciplined upon himself, and he doesn't bring in preconceived ideas. Obviously, we know he got the sanctuary wrong, so he wasn't perfect in that sense. So we need to make sure that if we're going to argue about one thing, we're fair and balanced, and that's why group study is important. So we look at the rules. The words are important. The Bible should define itself. We look for patterns and structures. We did that from the very beginning. Natural and spiritual is easy to see. Compare and contrast becomes more sophisticated, more nuanced. And then you start seeing what the differences are. And the reason why that becomes important is because an imagery that I'm using increasingly more is this imagery of a balance. If you're in a children's playground, where I'm from, we call them a seesaw. I don't know what you call them here. Yeah? Yeah. So, seesaw or a balance. This to me is a useful concept or image to try to help us to understand how juxtapositioning works. Because when you go to juxtapositioning, now we can go to another form, again a repeat and enlarge or a refinement of juxtapositioning, and that is what, I don't know if people have seen me talk about this in the before, so maybe they know where I'm headed. Any thoughts when we start thinking about balances? I'm looking for another word. When we start thinking about parables, which is to do with balances or mirroring, chiasms. And I'll put mirror. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Reflection or mirroring or chiasms? Not everybody knows what I mean? Yeah? Sister Denise, you know what I'm talking about?
I've heard it, but I don't remember.
Okay, so I'll give a really simple example. You have a piece of paper and you fold the piece of paper in half, put a crease on it and open it up again. Yeah? So you get a paintbrush and you put a blob of blue and a blob of black paint, and then what will you do? You fold it back, press it down, and then what do you do? You open it up and what do you get, Sister Denise? You get a reflection. So the black would go here and the blue would go here. Yeah, this is kindergarten maths. What are we trying to learn from that? The idea about mirroring or reflection. So this would line up with this and this would line up with this, and the distances are identical, the shapes are identical. So this concept is reflection or mirroring or chiasms. So what's on one side would be identical to what's on the other side. There's this, what I've called balancing. Does that help? Anybody else have any, are not sure about what chiasms or balances are? The reason why this becomes important and useful is on the left side of the balance, we're in Daniel 11:40. What have you got, Sister Catherine? Just one thing. Sorry? Okay, I'm in Daniel 11 verse 40, and you know, we've spoken about the natural and the spiritual, we've spoken about compare and contrast, so we're going to use those ideas. What would go on one side? North. So if you've got north on this side, Sister Denise, what do you have to have on the other side?
Well, if it's the same thing, it'd be north.
But it's not north. What would balance it out?
South.
South. So north on one side, south on the other. So if you said it's the same thing, is that what you said?
Yeah, I was thinking about your paint picture. It's
Yes.
the same thing on the other side.
Okay, so what's on this side? Because it's not just any kind of a north. What? King. So what's on this side? King. Can you see how they are identical? Yeah? So they're identical, but they can have subtle differences. So the north and the south. So the north, he experiences something. Say for instance, he wins. So if he wins, and it just said the king of the north and the king of the south had a fight and the king of the north won. That's all the information that you have. How many pieces of information is that? 3. North, south, win. Are we okay with that? Are you okay with that, Sister Denise? So we've got north, south and win. We know by default, not even just by common sense, there's a missing piece of information here because we want to get this balance. So this is a really simple example. It's almost trivial. What goes in this box here to balance this out? Brother Larry. Lose. Okay, now you said they're supposed to look the same, but they're opposites, they're polar opposites, win and lose, but we're going to make them the same. He wins what? What did he win? He won the war. And he lost the war. So you see they're the same. So it's war and war, king and king. They're the same. But we want to identify the differences. Now in the verse, it never mentioned about anyone losing. So we've just added that piece of information. So the question you want to ask yourself is, in the book of Revelation, it says, if any man, any person, adds to these words that's in this book, what's going to be poured upon them? Brother Douglas? A curse. So you need to ask yourself the question, am I going to be cursed? Or you're going to be cursed, if you're agreeing to it, because we're adding words into the verse. Are we breaking some cardinal biblical rule that's given in the book of Revelation? If it's for the book of Revelation, it's for all the Bible, that we're adding to God's word thoughts and ideas that are not in the verse. Is that wrong? Is it dangerous? Is it illegal? We need to really think about this in our next class. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for your goodness and mercy. Help us, Lord, to use our hearts and our minds to understand your word and to come close to you. Be with us and bless us, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.